I'm James Rule. Welcome to the Lonely Leader podcast, where we help existing and aspiring leaders find clarity, build resilience, drive performance, and enhance fulfillment. Welcome to the Lonely Leader podcast, and today I'm asking the question, are you optimizing your internal resources? Now, the motivation and the inspiration for this episode has come from the feedback from the listeners of our last episode. We focused very much on how much our meetings and fundamentally inefficient meetings costing you as a business. And that prompted some fabulous feedback, some reflection, some insights that made me decide to do a broader dive into this topic. Because as I explained in the previous episode, and if you haven't listened to that, perhaps jump back, listen to that, and come back and join us. But for those of you that did listen, you'll know that fundamentally where my driver was coming from was that so many leaders are talking about the need for more resource. If I just had more staff, more headcount, more marketing budget, whatever it may be, that additional resource would be the difference, the game changer. And it would be lovely if everybody could get that blank check, that finance could agree and sign off. Yeah, we can justify additional budgets, additional headcount, but rarely is that the case. So my challenge to leaders that I'm coaching, that I'm mentoring is, let's look within. Let's reflect on how well are we running our meetings, because in my experience, there's a huge amount of waste there. Now, as I said, because of the feedback, I'm now extrapolating that out and focusing very much on the resource of your staff. Because inefficient meetings, badly run meetings, meetings that are taking too long are killing the energy, the engagement, the productivity, and the innovation of your people. But there are multiple other questions that I think it's important to reflect on that I'm going to pose to you today in this episode that will make you reflect about, am I truly getting the best out of my people? Could I do more to get better performance from them, higher levels of fulfillment and engagement and productivity? So we'll dive into those questions. And as ever, the whole purpose of these episodes is to stimulate reflection. So to kick things off, the first question I want to pose to you is your onboarding process fit for purpose? Now, talent ID and recruitment, identification, and the subsequent offer of a job to somebody is half the battle, perhaps even less than half the battle. Once you've got that right person in a role, all too often, let's go in at the deep end. There's your desk, there's your computer. I'm being a bit simplistic, I know, but the onboarding process is critical. You can accelerate their impact, the insight they have with an effective onboarding process, the right training, the right connectivity, the right mentorship from people that are established in the organization can make a huge difference into how quickly and how much you get from your new hires. And this is not just a here's our manual, oh, tick a box, we've done the onboarding process. This is an ongoing situation. For me, I don't see onboarding as just a one hit and then you're in and away you go. For me, it's onboarding and training. The onboarding process feeds into the training, and we should never stop that. There are always ways to share insights, best practice, poor practice that is happening in the organization to ensure that everybody continues to learn, continues to grow. And that's an important cultural mantra as well, that we are continually learning. Nobody, no individual, however highly they perform, can say that I know all there is to know. Taking me into my second question, does your appraisal system need an overhaul? The old-fashioned, antiquated system is that annual appraisal. We've talked about this on previous episodes, but that system is redundant, it's antiquated, it is no longer fit for purpose. You cannot hope to cover all aspects of good performance, indifferent performance, poor performance in one annual recap and review. There needs to be a much more fluid and dynamic structure for giving and taking feedback between team members, but particularly between leaders and their direct reports. The appraisal system is all about being able to have difficult conversations, to give and take feedback, to course correct. And when it's done well, it is an X factor in enhancing and truly optimizing the performance of your people. When it's done badly, it's a great way to alienate, disengage, and ultimately drive your best talent to the exit door. We all need feedback. We all need appraisal. It should be happening frequently. And from the appraisal system, I move into the question of, is everybody being held accountable? If there's ambiguity, if there's grey areas in terms of what's expected, then you don't get the best out of people. It ties back into the meeting discipline that we talked about in the previous episode, which is linked in the show notes, about the need for clear, unambiguous actions. People need to know what's expected. They need to know what success looks like. They need to know what they are tasked with achieving. And that accountability comes out of good communication. It ties into our previous point about an appraisal system. If you have to course correct people, if you have to address underperformance, it's important that there's no ambiguity in what is expected, what is the new direction of travel, and what you are holding people accountable for and to. And I think, just as a side note here, it's really important to watch out for favoritism. What is difficult, without a shadow of a doubt, is giving and taking feedback and giving those difficult conversations the platform and the time they deserve. When somebody's underperforming, it's easy to turn a little bit of a blind eye, because addressing it can be awkward and uncomfortable, particularly so if it's somebody senior or it's somebody that you've known for a long time. So the classic failing that I see is leaders in a business sense, coaches in a sporting sense, holding those younger, more junior, less experienced staff to a standard and accountability and really calling them out on poor performance, but perhaps not being quite as direct with those more senior staff members or players who have been in the organization for a longer amount of time and perhaps who have a closer relationship with the leader. It's important for you as an individual and for you to be cognizant in your wider ecosystem that there are no favorites. Good performance is good performance and bad performance is bad performance. Everybody needs to be held to account, and we're all judged on the here and now, irrespective of what's gone on previously. I use it in a sporting context. You might have been the MVP, the man of the match for 4 weeks in a row, and that's great. You'll have been getting good feedback, but occasionally you're going to have a bad game. And just like everybody else, that needs to be reviewed and appraised and course corrected, irrespective of how you performed previously. And this takes me into my next question. Do you have meeting discipline? Now, I'm not going to over elaborate on this. I touched on it at the top of this episode. The reality is I see so many meetings being badly managed, no structure, going on tangents, alpha personalities dominating, too much time spent articulating the problem, not enough time moving everybody's energy and creativity into a solution-focused discussion, and a lack of clear actions and accountability leading to ambiguity and certain people doing more than they should and certain people not doing enough. Now, why is this so important? Well, just from a pure efficiency point of view about optimizing resource, if you don't have accountability, if you don't keep meetings punchy and structured, you're not going to get the best out of people. And a harder thing to spot, but equally important from a risk point of view, is if you are constantly dragging people into meetings that they don't need to be in, or meetings are taking far longer than they should, or people don't feel they can get a voice or contribute because certain personalities are dominating the floor. Well, then guess what? You stifle people's engagement, you erode their fulfillment and their productivity. And if people don't feel engaged, they don't feel valued, they don't feel they have a voice, they're not going to stay. They're either going to just do the bare minimum, punch in and punch out. They're physically present, but they're not really emotionally present, and they're not giving their best to the role, or they're going to be a bit more direct and say, actually, I'm leaving. So please do jump into that previous episode and reflect on how you can improve the discipline in your meetings. And whilst we're on the subject of meetings, I want to ask, are there elephants in your meeting room? So many of these points that I'm touching on have an overlap, as you'd expect, because there is no siloed approach to this. It all blends together into a ability to get the best out of your people. So I've talked within the appraisal system, I've talked in meeting discipline about the ability to give and take feedback, the ability to critically appraise performance as a collective, as a team, but also as individuals. Why is this so important? Well, things don't go well all of the time. Whether it's a sports team that we can use as a simple analogy, you don't win every week, you don't ace your game plan every week. It's no different in industry. We can put all the energy and effort into our strategy and our creative thinking, but it doesn't mean that everything is going to run exactly to plan. So we have to have an ability to assess it, learn from what's gone well, learn from what's not gone well, and implement that accordingly. Now, that sometimes means having difficult conversations with a group or with an individual. You cannot shy away from that because the old adage of the elephant in the room, you've got to address it when it's small. If you continually fail to address underperformance or people eroding their culture with their behaviors or inappropriate behaviors or falling below a standard, then the elephant gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it gets so large and unwieldy that people are like, oh, I don't want to be the person that has to attack this. It's too big. It's too difficult. And so the problems continue to manifest and exist within the organization. You must deal with the elephant while it's small. Delegation. The next question is everybody delegating effectively? You included and the other leaders and managers within your business. Now, I've done a whole episode on delegation. You can find a link to that in the show notes. There is no doubt that delegation is a major problem for most of us. That is just a statement of fact. You probably are nodding your head or smiling wryly as you hear me say this. Why do we struggle with delegation? Well, our ego tells us that nobody can do the job as well as us. And because of that, it's just easier to roll up our sleeves and get stuck in and do it. And that may be true, but the reality is there's not enough hours in the day for you to do every role within your team. Irrespective of your level of seniority, there will be some things you need to focus on, and there are some things you have to delegate. If you don't delegate, you compromise performance because you can't stretch yourself so thinly. Your performance drops, therefore the benefit to the business of you as an individual drops. You disengage team members because they get a very clear sense, my boss does not trust me. That is why they do not delegate to me. And that erodes their confidence, their fulfillment, and subsequently their ability to optimize their performance moving forward. So we have to decide, where do you need to deploy your talents most consistently? And where does that focus need to be? And where do you need to delegate and give other people a chance to step up and take on more responsibility? And if you struggle with that, listen to that episode on delegation. We all struggle with it, but there is a way through. Which leads me into my next question. Is micromanagement necessary? Now, I do not subscribe to the notion that all micromanagement is bad. Never micromanage. You will damage the individual. No, let's look at where people are on their journey. If somebody, going right back to our first question, is your onboarding process fit for purpose? If you just say, hello, welcome to the business, there's your desk, there's your computer, there's the passkey for the door, on you go, that's not effective leadership. That is where micromanagement is needed to make sure that process is in-depth, it's detailed, that that person feels they can ask any and every question, and you really micromanage them to raise their knowledge and their understanding and their ability to do the job. Equally, as they get more adept and more comfortable, you can ease back and lean back into my previous point about delegation, trusting them to get on and do the job. Now, somebody may have had a difficult run of form. They may have struggled with an element of what they are doing. There may have been a period of poor performance. That's not the time to say, well, get on with it. You know what you're doing. That's a time to consider potentially a little bit more of a closer contact, more frequent touch points, and yes, a degree of micromanagement to help them regain their form, to help them get back on the horse. Whatever analogy and adage you want to use, help them get back to that level of performance you need them at. So there are times when micromanagement is needed, but let's take a sweeping generalization. When it comes to the majority of occasions, it's important to train well, give people trust, faith, and confidence, and then delegate and let them run with it, knowing that if your appraisal system works and your meeting discipline is good, you will have more than enough platform and opportunity to revisit that poor performance if it exists, teach, learn, course correct, and ensure that people move forward without repeating those mistakes in the future. The next question I want to pose to you is fear stifling innovation? You need people to be creatively thinking about solutions to problems that the business is encountering, problems that your customers are raising with you. You need people bringing their collective intellect and their innovative ideas to the table to find the right solutions. Now, do you encourage that? At first glance, you'll say, of course I do. Of course I want those innovative solutions. Now, the second part then is, do people fear your reaction to mistakes? If you're the sort of leader that loses your cool, loses your composure whenever anybody makes a mistake, people quickly recognize that, understand that, and hold back. So in a sporting context, and I know I use a lot of sporting analogies, but the player that is fearful of the coach's reaction starts to take less risks. They don't make that pass that may be a little bit 50-50. Now, that means that's safe. They're not going to make a mistake, but it also reduces the ability to find those game-winning passes, the passes that open up the defensive organization of the opposition. So in business sense, what does that mean? Well, if people fear your reaction, they might have great ideas, but they keep them to themselves. They don't put them into play because like, well, this is a good idea, but if it doesn't quite work out, the boss is going to lose his or her temper with me. So you need to reflect on what was your emotional reaction the last time someone made a mistake. Was it balanced? Did you have the difficult conversation? Did you assess and appraise performance? Did you ensure that the individual learned from their mistakes and then cascade that learning into the wider team? Or did you flip out? Did you lose your cool? Did you lose your composure? So it's really important to recognize the integral role you play to getting the best out of your people and how you react to adversity and mistakes. It's easy to be a great leader when everybody's hitting their targets, making the right calls, delivering with excellence. It's much harder when people are struggling, making mistakes. They're not going out there to do it deliberately. Everybody wants to be successful. How are you going to react to it, and how are you going to support them to ensure it doesn't happen again? So as we approach my last couple of questions, I want to ask you, are you developing the next wave of talent? We get obsessed with new hires, recruitment. I need to bring somebody fresh in, fresh perspectives, fresh ideas. And that has a benefit to any organization, but I encourage you to look within. I am thrilled with so many examples, both in my own leadership journey and the people I now coach and mentor, where there was a proverbial diamond in the rough. Somebody took the time to step back, look around, and identify talent that was hiding in plain sight, whether that needed a arm around the shoulder and an additional bit of responsibility to bring that talent to the fore. Perhaps it needed a repositioning, taking somebody from one area of a business and trialing them in another area. But there will be potential new leaders already in your organization. But going back to that first point about onboarding and training, you need to ensure that that training and that ability to learn and develop is accessible to everybody. Mentoring needs to be in place from you and other senior leaders. Abilities for people to ask questions, to step out of their existing role, to broaden their understanding of the wider business. There are so many ways that you can build a talent pathway, but it is so much more impactful and indeed cheaper to develop talent from within. Impactful because they already know the organization, the culture, the expectation, and a lot of the people and personalities. Cheaper because you're not having to have time spent scouring the market when perhaps you've got a gap and you're trying to fill it. That gap's already there to be filled when you bring someone up from within. And equally, the associated costs of recruitment and fees, etc., well, they're negated as well. So really reflect on, what is our succession plan? It might sound good in theory, but are we actually doing it in practice? Are we putting programs in place to help identify and develop the next wave of talent? And this is an area I spend a huge amount of time now as a coach with organizations, from FTSE 100 businesses down to small, medium-sized enterprises. We've always got to be looking at where the next wave of talent is coming from. And last but not least, are you role modeling the best practices? I talk about this a lot. It permeates a lot of my insights and learnings on this podcast. But if you want to get the best out of your people, you've got to show them what the best looks like, how you operate in meetings, how you give and take feedback, how you show humility when you've had mistakes, how you deal with mistakes within your direct reports, how you operate day to day is being watched. Your words, your actions, your demeanor, everything about it feeds into the culture of your organization. As I always say, you are that emotional thermostat. How you set the tone and standard ripples out through the wider DNA of the business. So if you want to get the best out of your people, it all starts with you. How effective are your meetings? How do you hold people to account? It all starts with you showing people what best practice looks like. So, as ever, I hope these questions prompt reflection. I hope that many of them you already do, but that there'll be something in this that you say, I could improve that. I could reflect on the succession planning. I could be a bit more composed. I possibly am stifling innovation. I'm not convinced necessarily that we've got the right training programs in place. Perhaps we do still struggle with delegation. I do sense there's a bit too much micromanagement. All of these areas can be improved. Yes, it's wonderful when we have a budget to expand delivery and to expand our headcount, but before we go there as our default, let's make sure we can look ourselves in the mirror and say we are truly optimizing the internal resource that already exists. I wish you the best of luck with it. Thanks for listening to the Lonely Leader podcast. I'd be very grateful if you could share and follow if the content resonates. And if you're looking for additional free resource to support your continued growth and development, then please do check out our social media and website details in the show notes. Remember, quality leadership on the outside must always start within.